Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Day mentioned, my name is Adana St. Louis Gomez. Okay, that's better, sorry. From Eco Engineering, I am the study manager for this particular project, and we are the environmental consultants. So at the first meeting, we would have introduced ourselves, we would have highlighted certain elements of the terms of reference that would have been provided by the EMA, as to guidelines to what needs to be covered within the EIA. And as promised, we said the second meeting we would come back with results from some of those investigations, so that is what my presentation is based on. So just in terms of giving you a wide set, you would see in the left, the bottom left, Trinidad, the map of Trinidad, and you would see the project site. And then the main part of the map, you will see the 3 new areas that are being proposed for mining. Bearing in mind that National Quarries has been in business since 1979, so that these areas were previously mined. This CAC is to go back to these areas and to continue mining. Sorry, I meant to mention the different areas as well in the wider scope of the National Quarries area, which would be further south. There's Guayco, Ture Road that you'd have to access the plant using, Kunapo, Grandi, etc. This is just a zoomed in version of the map so that you see we coming from like the Extra Foods Junction and accessing the site via Ture Road. We kind of also pointed out Guayco Secondary, which we're all at, and the San Grande Regional Corporation. At the end of this study, the final deliverable is the EIA report. And like I would have mentioned, the TOR gives, the terms of reference gives a listing of all the things that need to be covered by the EIA, which includes the legal framework, description of the project, description of the environment, which includes both the physical, biological, and human environment, the analysis of impacts, analysis of alternatives, stakeholder consultation, which we are part of, environmental management and mitigation strategy, as well as the monitoring and intervention strategy. What my presentation, as I mentioned, would take a closer look at would be the description of the environment. For the physical and the biological environment, Carey consultants will take a closer look at the human environment, as well as the analysis of impacts. We need to figure out the baseline, what is existing, in order to know what the effects of the project would be. So we would have been required to do, in order to capture that baseline, we have to collect data. Sometimes it's collected using certain desktop studies. At times we can ask certain agencies for data that they have, and other times we have to do sampling. So this map shows the water sampling locations that we would have done water sampling in for both wet season and dry season. The blue would have been what National Quarries has conducted the sampling locations they would have used historically, and the red would be what the areas that we did. So there would have been 4 points on 2 rivers, the Lesaiva River and the Little Lesaiva River. We would have done upstream and downstream testing. So climate, we would have approached WRA, Water Resources Agency, to get information on rainfall data for the past 5 years. We would look at the closest rainfall gauge that they have available in respect to National Quarries site. And from that data, we would have been able to tell that the highest average monthly rainfall would have been recorded in October, and the lowest average monthly rainfall would have been done in March. Wind speeds were between 4.2 and 7.76 knots, which is typical for our region. In terms of the topography and drainage, the site generally varies from flat to undulating, and the study area falls within the boundaries of the quarry and North Oropouche watersheds. On site, the 3 proposed areas for mining, the Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie areas, would have been the Little Lesaiva, and the Honda rivers. You would have probably noted that there was no testing done in the Honda River. that was due to access. So we would have gone to the field, and based on the conditions at the time, we were not able to access Honda, so that monitoring was conducted at Little Lesiva and Lesiva, and that would be representative of both Alpha and Bravo areas. In terms of the surface water quality, most of the parameters monitored were compliant with the available standard, with the exception of total suspended solids, pH, and total oil and grease. The groundwater, the study area lies on an intergranular aquifer, as well as defined areas with significant natural replenishment to groundwater. We again would have approached WRA for data on wells that they have within the study area or close to the study area. We got information on 3 wells, and these parameters that they would have monitored were within the standard, with the exception of color at 1 well, total iron at 2 wells, and alkalinity at all 3 of the wells that they would have monitored. This particular map gives you the 2 areas that we would have used for air quality monitoring. We needed to look at upstream and downstream locations. Upstream to see, upwind, sorry, to see what is coming onto the site, and downwind to see what is leaving the site. That has to be done for both wet season and dry season. And this would show you where we would have monitored noise. Noise is monitored at 4 locations, and you're supposed to include the nearest receptor, and that would have been where you see NQN1. So there will be different points within the site and on the boundary of the site, as well as the closest receptor. Based on our tests for air and noise, the measurements were all below their respective limits. So for air, there is the air pollution rules, and for noise, the noise pollution control rules. So everything was within limits. For air, the parameters monitored would have been nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, ozone, PM 2.5, PM 10, and TSP. In terms of the biological environment, we would have done an ecology survey where they would walk the sites at different points, and from that study, the vegetation consisted of disturbed savannas, forests, marsh areas, and evergreen seasonal forests with large bodies of water and pockets of abandoned mining areas. They would have discovered 64 plant species along the 9 transects. 36 of those are considered commercially important. In terms of the avifauna species, 68 were recorded, and only 4 of them were noted as being uncommon. 12 fish species were noted, and the sword-tailed sardine was the dominant fish species recorded. And we would have found 12 organisms when we did the sediment and particulate matter sampling. I'm briefly going to touch on the sociocultural because, like I mentioned, Dr. Day and Kyrie would be doing a lot of that in depth. So it basically includes the communities of Valencia, Ture, Guayco, and the town of Sangre Grande. Access to the property, as we all kind of figured out, is mainly through Ture community, and the wider impact area falls under the jurisdiction of the Sangre Grande Regional Corporation. Right, so the analysis of impacts. This is a scientific process, so we don't just come up with a determination of the classification off the top of our head. It's a process. So at first we would identify the potential impacts. We would identify them both based on the recommendations from the EMA. We would also have significant experience in doing mining projects, so we will look at that as well. And from the first introductory meeting, we would have heard some of the concerns of the residents, so that would have also kind of been filtered into the impacts that we would have looked at. We then move on to establishing the significance of these impacts, where and who and what will be affected and how. And then we classify these impacts based on the geographical extent, the duration, and the intensity. We also rate them before and after the mitigation measures that we suggest. And we also consider cumulative impacts with other known proposed activities in the Ture area and surrounding areas. So in your handout, you would see just a very long list of impacts with, like I mentioned, classifications before and after the mitigation measures. I kind of made it a little more succinct in this format, so I broke it down into the construction impacts that would have been eliminated, what were classified as low, and then what were classified as moderate for both the construction phase as well as the quarrying phase. So impaired water quality due to improper sewage disposal, that was considered as an impact that would be eliminated once the mitigation measures are implemented. And like I said, you can see the whole list and the before and after ratings in your handout. For the construction impacts that will be reduced to low, there's altered drainage, on-site erosion, slope instability, impaired water quality due to hydrocarbon spills and leaks, soil contamination, sediment contamination. If you see a C next to it, it means that we considered it a cumulative impact. Impaired air quality, noise, improper solid waste disposal, improper disposal of felt vegetation, loss of riparian vegetation, impacts to terrestrial fauna, etc. And those that we considered would be moderate: impaired water quality due to siltation, sedimentation, loss of terrestrial vegetation, impacts to rare, endangered, and threatened species, and impacts to the aquatic habitat. During the quarrying phase of the project, these are the impacts that we think would be eliminated: impaired water quality due to improper sewage disposal, groundwater contamination, as well as improper solid waste disposal. These are the ones that we consider would be low: on-site erosion, impaired water quality due to chemical, hydrocarbon spills and leaks, impaired air quality due to dust, impaired air quality due to exhaust fumes, soil contamination, sediment contamination, noise, improper disposal of fine and sludge, and disturbance to terrestrial fauna. And these are the ones that we consider moderate: altered drainage, which means it's a flooding, impaired water quality due to siltation and sedimentation, and disturbance to the aquatic and benthic communities. So from that list, I would have concentrated on the ones rated moderate to kind of give a listing of the mitigation measures that we are proposing. So for altered drainage, as I would have mentioned, National Quarries has been in operation since 1979, so it's an operating quarry, so that they would be required to update and implement the stormwater management plan, make sure to keep any natural drain paths clear of any cut vegetation, design adequately sized drains and ponds to reduce the potential for flooding, analyze the capacity of the existing watercourses within and downstream the site to make sure that any increase in capacity of the water channel and it wouldn't be affected by any new peak flow, and to schedule drainage works as far as practicable during the dry season, and to provide appropriately sized temporary drains to control drainage runoff. Impaired water quality due to siltation, sedimentation, make sure that there's some sort of barrier, so to construct bale dikes, silt fences, diversion berms, all to prevent loose dirt or debris from entering the watercourse, and to keep stockpiles of excavated soil a safe distance away from the watercourse, and to install sediment screens along the drainage paths to reduce the migration of silt into the drains and the rivers. I know this one comes up pretty regularly, so impaired air quality due to dust is to retain the vegetative buffer along the perimeter of the site that will act as a barrier to kind of keep it on site, maintain the natural vegetative cover as far as practical, frequently wet bare surfaces and access ways, ensure that the truck tires are washed before exiting the quarry onto paved roads, and to cover all transport vehicles with tarpaulin, etc., to ensure that the dust doesn't kick up off-site, and optimize the use of vehicles and equipment to eliminate unnecessary movement. During the quarrying phase now, rehabilitate quarried areas immediately before moving on to the next area to be quarried, and enforce traffic speed regulations within the quarry, and that would reduce the winds created from passing vehicles and limits the opportunity for material to be suspended in the air as dust. Noise and vibration, only use vehicles with a valid inspection certificate and ensure that vehicles are regularly inspected, and properly maintain all equipment and the vehicles to ensure noise emission control systems are properly functioning. Turn off all engines, from vehicles and equipment when not in use, schedule works, site preparation works, as well as the movement of trucks between 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. to the extent practical, and to inform surrounding residents, communities, and groups ahead of the start of works. Loss of terrestrial vegetation and loss of riparian vegetation, they have similar mitigation measures, so they were grouped together to clear only areas that have been identified as having potential for sand and gravel extraction, maintain the natural vegetation cover as far as practical, and rehabilitate, revegetate these abandoned, exhausted mining areas in accordance with the National Quarries Rehabilitation Plan. And impacts to species of commercial importance, rehabilitates, again, revegetates abandoned, exhausted mining areas by replanting commercially important trees and prohibits hunting within the NQCL site. Again, the full list is in your handout, so you can feel free to take a more detailed read at it. The Environmental Management Plan, this is an action plan for implementing and monitoring the effectiveness of the proposed mitigation measures, because it makes no sense that we give a long slew of mitigation measures and they're never implemented, and when they're implemented, you don't know if it's working. So this is kind of what the EMA puts in place to ensure that there are checks and balances, so to speak. So this plan identifies who's responsible for carrying out whichever mitigation measures, the time frame for the action, and the cost of implementing the mitigation measure. And it also includes a monitoring plan to see how well the mitigation measures are working. And what does the monitoring plan have? It lists the methods for ensuring that mitigation and the compensatory measures are accurate and effective. So it will detail, monitor TSP ever so often, or it will give you a very specific time frame it needs to be done. You'd have to measure right after rainfall, so it's very specific, the monitoring plan. It names the party responsible for verification. It indicates the parameters to be measured and their frequency. It names the relevant parties that are required to undertake the monitoring, including what their specialized training should be and if there's any necessary equipment and materials that are going to be needed for that monitoring plan, for that particular parameter, and it identifies mechanisms for reviewing the findings or sharing the monitoring results. The EIA also included some supplemental plans, which would have been the Stormwater Management Plan, the Water Quality Management Plan, which the National Quarries would have already had, so we just updated it and make sure that it's in line now with these new proposed areas. The Emergency Response Plan, the Stakeholder Engagement Plan, which Kyrie will discuss further, and the Grievance Redress Plan. So I thank you for your attention, and I pass it back to Dr. Dane.